Hello, I'm Robert Royal, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing, which is a daily column series that appears online 365 days a year. And thank you for coming to this podcast of The Catholic Thing, which is the third in our series covering the Synod on synodality, which is currently just begun in Rome. I'm delighted that today we have along with us an old friend of mine, a longtime friend of mine, Francis X. Maier, who has had a distinguished career as a journalist, as a collaborator with the great Archbishop Charles Chaput, and is a regular contributor to the Catholic Thing every other week. So, Fran, it's great to be with you. I'm in Rome, and Fran is still back in the United States, but
right.
I wanted to talk with you today because you wrote on Friday a very interesting column, I thought, in the Wall Street Journal. Fran writes for many publications, including ours and First Things. But the Wall Street Journal, of course, has a much larger reach than any of our Catholic or our religious publications. So I thought this was a very interesting essay that appeared there. And I wanted to give you a chance to expand a bit further for our audience about a few points. So I've got it right here, and I'm going to read a few things. And I'm going to ask you, Fran, to just kind of tell us what you mean by that. I mean, one of the first things you said that I think is very important is that the whole idea of a synod on synodality is kind of obscure and mind-numbing. And you said that it seems like it, and because it is, and it's hardly the most urgent issue in the church these days. We know that there are many other things like sexual abuse and the educational crisis, because Catholics haven't been educated very much. You say it's an ambiguous theological concept. And Francis, I'm quoting here, Pope Francis has very different priorities from his predecessors and intends to pursue them, solidifying his place as the most authoritarian Roman pontiff in decades. Why do you say that?
Right. Well, I think the authoritarian aspect, of course, that will be interpreted negatively, but in terms of the exercise of the papal office, he's certainly more forceful in that exercise than anyone since Pius XI. I'm sure he finds that necessary. I think it deviates from the way the papal ministry has been exercised over the last 5 or 6 or 10 pontificates, and that's a striking element. I mean, remember that Francis is the first pope who hasn't experienced directly the Second Vatican Council. I mean, Benedict XVI, Paul VI, John Paul II were all very involved in the process. Francis wasn't, and he also comes from not Europe, which is the historic home of the Church, but from the Third World. I mean, from Latin America, and so his perspectives are very different, and his priorities are different. Now, on one level, on an important level, that's to be expected. Popes change, times change, and priorities need to change. I think the disruptive effect of what's going on is that this seems to be taking church discipline and theology in a potentially very different direction from his predecessors. By that I mean, and I don't want to talk too long here, by that I mean that if you look at the work of Joseph Ratzinger and Karol Wojtyła, and also Paul VI, obviously, all of them had what was essentially a centripetal pontificate. By centripetal, I mean pushing things back together after the centrifugal effect of the fragmenting effect of the council. Synodality seems to be a doctrine, to the degree I can understand it properly, of decentralizing at exactly the time when the church is under an enormous amount of pressure, both from the inside and the outside, which strikes a lot of people as imprudent.
You say in your essay, I'm just looking at it again here, that he manifests a lot of ambiguity about matters of Catholic belief, and it causes confusion among the faithful. And I think, of course, since the idea of synodality is in itself so vague an idea, there are people here in Rome who are arguing that it doesn't even have a specific goal, that what it is what it is going to do. That's all. It's a kind of a pragmatic thing. But you also kind of emphasize the point that he's been a bit abrasive in responding to people who raise that kind of issue, and that since a pope is supposed to be the unifier in the church, by actually his trying to force his will on what's going on, he's actually alienated a number of people. And instead of becoming the pontifex, the bridge builder, he's driven away some people who actually might be his friends otherwise. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Or who might be, people who might be persuadable, even if they simply said, well, he's the Pope, and so I'm going to go along with it, even though I don't fully understand or agree with it. I mean, I think that's the instinct of most Catholics. The problem is that the Church in general has forgotten history, her own history, and that includes the history of popes. I mean, Francis isn't the first pope to have an abrasive manner. There have been a lot of them, and that doesn't make him a bad pope. It makes him an unusual one for the current environment that intentionally or otherwise tends to place many people, put them off. You know, the ambiguity issue is something that as a parent you and I would understand very well. I mean, if you give ambiguous witness to your kids, they'll end up doing things that are very different from what you want them to do, or just being frankly angry with you for not giving them proper formation and leadership.
We may do those things anyway, but at least we don't have to contribute.
Right, but I mean, you know, when it becomes part of what is an apparent policy, it really becomes extremely disturbing. And I don't know if that's intentional or otherwise, but that's the practical effect, and we're dealing with practical effects.
Mm-hmm. Fran, you've worked with bishops before on synods, and this is something I've been asking people here in Rome and trying to get some range finding. So you've worked at least at 3 synods. You and I were here for the synod on youth when out of nowhere this idea from synodality came out of, I think was inserted toward the end of the document that came out of that synod. What is your general kind of impression of how this synod differs from the experiences that you've had in the past?
Well, I mean, remember that synods are supposed to be about bishops. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean, they're not kind of general councils. They're not. They're consultative, not legislative, and they were designed when they were revived after the council to reinforce and revive the voice of the global episcopate in the leadership of the church. I mean, the Pope is the universal pastor, but the idea of the synods was, you know, bishops are successors of the apostles, and they have a real practical role in the administration and leadership of the church. So when you introduce clergy and lay people as active members instead of just consultors or observers, it changes the whole identity of the synod. So this synod is very different from the 3 that I worked at and the various ones that you've worked at, Bob, in the sense that, look, every synod has a political dimension. That's just human nature. That's the way they work. But this one is a really odd combination, in my opinion, a combination of quite obvious manipulation, and maybe that's too strong a word, but obviously agenda adjustment and involving people that really.
If I can interrupt just a second, manipulation and agenda towards what? I think people would like to know.
Yeah, toward getting predetermined results in a way that isn't consistent with Catholic history, doctrine, or discipline. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about homosexuality and things like that. There's been an effective schism within the German church, and these things, if they are meant to be models for the entire church, are very disturbing.
Yeah. You know, as we both know, Cardinal Zen has written a rather stinging letter to his brother bishops and to others, and he uses the phrase that this Pope has used quite often, that we believe in a God of surprises, which I think is true. That just the Christianity itself is a surprise that happened in human history and then changed the face to Western civilization. Mm-hmm. But Zen went on to say that there seems to be, the God of surprises seems to be surprises that we already know are kind of built into the structure of what's going on right now. So I think even he agrees quite deeply with what you just said. Let me ask one more question, because these podcasts are meant to be brief, as the Catholic thing is a brief publication every day. And people have lots of other things to follow. one strain that has come through, and it's not only something that we Americans have been sensitive to. I see this in commentaries elsewhere, that it's primarily in America that the strongest criticism or commentary, if we want to put it in more neutral terms, on the synod has been coming from. And there seems to be, I want to put this generously and accurately at the same time, there just seems to be a general incomprehension on the part of this Pope about the church in America. Many of the things that I think that he's pointed to about being pastoral, not being rigid, reaching out to people, being open. I think that is my experience largely of the church in America. You may have a different opinion of it. But there seems to be intermingled in this debate about where the synodality is going also a kind of a reluctance, because America seems to be the strongest voice questioning. Questions themselves seem to be taken personally in the Vatican these days, as if to question something is an attack rather than an attempt to clarify. Just give me your reactions to that strain and what's going on in synodality.
Well, look, I think first of all, I think it's obvious that the Holy Father doesn't like the United States. And by the way, I interviewed a foreign metropolitan archbishop who had no stake in this, who volunteered the fact that he felt that was the case with the Holy Father. You know, I staffed in part the World Meeting of Families here in Philadelphia in 2015, and Francis was visibly surprised at how enthusiastic the 800,000 people were who greeted him here. I mean, it was as if he had already assumed that he wouldn't be welcome, when in fact he was very, very warmly welcomed. Archbishop Chaput commented on that privately, that he was visibly surprised. I think Americans love the Pope because for a very long time we were a mission church and we looked to Rome for support in a hostile culture. So it's a big surprise for Americans to be disliked. Now, there's historical reasons for that. I mean, this Pope is a Latin American. The United States has been too many times unpopular and doing unhelpful things in Latin America, and so there's some legitimacy to it. But I don't think the Holy See understands the United States, and certainly this Holy Father doesn't. And there's a lot of sense of confusion and woundedness on the part of American bishops who just don't understand why they're not liked and why they're not listened to when they're making very prudent recommendations about how best to communicate the Catholic message in this country. So there's a real disconnect between the way Rome sees us under this pontificate and the way the church really is. And I know that for a fact because I've interviewed confidentially a lot of the bishops in this country. And they're not disloyal, they're very faithful, but they are confused and sometimes they're pretty irritated.
Yeah. Well, look, we're running out of time. We'll have you back again soon,
Sure.
Fran, because
Thanks very much.
You're just a font of wisdom about these things, and we really appreciate it. Let's hope that this Synod on Synodality, which is supposed to get us all walking together, may overcome some of the difficulties that we've documented here.
Yep. Okay.
So I'm Robert Royal, and we thank again Francis X. Maier, who's our visiting guest today from the United States. I'm in Rome, and we'll be back soon, and thank you for watching.
God bless you.